Hello, this is Sunship Radio. Welcome back, my listeners. What I want to talk about today is trauma and the coronavirus. So, first of all, some of you may know my story. I've been through a lot of trauma myself, like a severe amount of trauma. And I've had to deal with a lot of the after effects of it. So I want to try to pull from my experience to help some of you understand what might be going on in our nation right now. So this is what I think. I think with this coronavirus, what we are going through is a national form of trauma. And this comes with a lot of... I think when it's all said and done, the after effects of this are going to last for a long time. Emotionally, for some, physically, and psychologically. Both corporately as a body of people, and then also individually for those that are maybe specifically affected by the virus. But what people don't understand is there's all these invisible losses that are happening right now. And the reason I understand this is because when I went through my trauma, I had a lot of invisible losses that nobody could see or understand because they had never been through anything. And so I had a tremendous amount of grief that came along with that I didn't understand for a long time. So in an effort to name what is happening right now, because I think sometimes naming things helps. It doesn't fix everything, but sometimes having a name for something makes you feel a little bit better, because at least you know what you're dealing with. And what we are dealing with on a national scale is trauma and loss. Many people are losing things, are going to lose things in the process of how this all unfolds. I mean, there's tangible things like they lose their job, they lose their health. Those are a little more tangible and easily seen. But what's not easily seen is things like the loss of an identity. For example, the loss of a national identity, that we're this first world nation where nothing bad can happen. Well, guess what? That's being shattered right now. And we have to sort of reframe our understanding of our nation. And that we're not immune to things happening to us. So there's the loss of that. There's the loss of the sense of safety that's happening right now for a lot of people. The loss of the sense of stability and even kind of a predictable narrative. I think a lot of people's lives in America, they're relatively quote-unquote normal. Well, that's been lost and disrupted. Okay? And then in those losses, some people may feel confused or lost. And what's really, some of that confusion and some of that feeling that you're feeling, some of that uncertainty that you're feeling is grief. You're grieving the loss of something. Again, in some cases, it might be something tangible. If you've lost your job, if you've lost your health, those are real losses, and you have to grieve those losses. And you also have to grieve the invisible losses that I was discussing as well. Now, our culture, our nation, historically has not been very good at dealing with and processing trauma. If we go back to... because we haven't really had something on this scale, at least since 9/11. Now, 9/11 was actually relatively short-lived. It actually really only affected probably actually a small portion of the population in New York from a felt how significantly they had to feel that. And the rest of us, for the most part, were able to move on with our lives without too much of a hiccup other than some increased checks at airports. So I don't know when the last time we felt this level of disruption in our lives. Maybe World War II. But again, that the three wars from this century, World War II, four, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and then Iraq, Afghanistan, none of those were on our soil. Those were all fought somewhere else. So everything that's happening right now is unfolding on our soil, on our land. So you might have to go back to the Civil War for a time when our lives and daily lives and existences were threatened or significantly disrupted in such a way. So historically, our nation, our culture has not dealt with trauma very well. If we go to World War II, the World War II generation came back, buried all of that trauma. They had about 2 weeks on their boat trip back to discuss it with their platoon, and then they had to get back to life as normal. They kind of buried all that, and then that kind of, along with the Great Depression for that matter, the trauma of the Great Depression and World War II, that all kind of got buried. And as a result, you had, in my opinion, you had the 60s. Then you had the Vietnam generation, and at least the soldiers who came back, that never got dealt with, and that had pretty catastrophic consequences for a lot of the Vietnam vets, some of whom would still suffer to this day if they're still alive. Those men suffered for the rest of their lives with that kind of trauma because it was never dealt with and never honored and never really processed in healthy ways, either by themselves or the culture around them that did not support them in the ways that they needed. So historically, we're really not very good as a people at dealing with trauma, grief, and loss. We are really terrible at it. And my hope is with this coronavirus pandemic and the kind of trauma and loss that we are going to experience either individually or corporately, I see this as perhaps an opportunity to learn how to deal with these things well and in a healthy manner. In the Bible, it talks about weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. And I think there's a lesson in that. And the lesson is to be able to enter into people's suffering with them. And that's one thing that I also didn't get in the trauma I experienced. I really didn't have anybody in my life that knew how to effectively enter into suffering with me. They didn't know how to do it. And so I think this is an opportunity for people to learn that as either individuals experience trauma themselves or if somebody around you experiences trauma and loss themselves, there are ways to be with them. One of the ways to not be with people, and one of the things not to do during this time, is try to fix people. Trying to fix people usually makes things worse, at least emotionally. If sometimes there are practical things you can do to help somebody, and that's great, fixing them meals or bringing them food or whatever it may be. But one thing not to do is try to fix them or fix their pain. When you try to fix somebody's pain, what you're implicitly saying is, it's not okay to be where you are. It's not okay to hurt. It's not okay to grieve. I'm uncomfortable with your pain, and I'm going to emotionally distance myself from you because I don't know what to do with your pain, because I'm uncomfortable with your pain. Actually, I'm uncomfortable with your pain because I'm uncomfortable with my own pain. That's all of what you communicate when you try to fix somebody. And when you cannot be emotionally present for somebody, that's what you communicate. So the goal here is to be emotionally present with somebody who is hurting. And there's probably a lot of people who are hurting in this time. So learn to be emotionally present with the pain. Learn how to comfort people. Learn how to just be with them in the moment. That's the way you minister to people in need. Because you don't even have the power to fix them anyway. Only God does. You don't have any power at all to fix their problem. Only God has that kind of power. So that's my challenge to you is, in this time, recognize that what we're going through is a national trauma. And there may be loss and grief associated with that. You may experience it. Whether or not you get the virus, you may experience some grief and loss of just your sense of identity or your sense of our national sort of immunity from problems that we think we have. And my other challenge is not only to recognize it, identify it, and name it, but then to also be present with it. Be present with other people in their suffering. Learn to be present with that. It's a very important skill to learn emotionally, and I would suggest that the Bible actually asks us to do that. So that's all I have for this post. I wish all of you well. I pray Psalm 91 and protection over all believers everywhere. So that's Sonship Radio signing off for today.